Hello everyone, my name is William Wright, and today we'll be learning about how to cook a steak using an oven rather than most people's common method of a grill. Some of the stuff that you're going to need to do here, or have ready for you when doing this, is your steak. In this case I've chosen an 8-ounce beef tenderloin. The seasonings that you prefer on your cuts of meat. We have our stove, and I also have some olive oil and a cast iron skillet. I have the oven already preheated to 450 degrees. I've done this to save a little bit of time as the oven preheating takes most of the time of this process. This cast iron skillet is chosen because of how hot you can get it. This is going to allow us to get the perfect sear on the steak. The olive oil helping to increase that sear. And the cut of meat I chose is just for its tenderness. So as I mentioned, the oven is already preheated to 450 degrees. I am now going to preheat the stovetop to as hot as possible. I'm going to do this because I need that sear to be as good as possible in a short amount of time. You don't want to let this get too hot too quickly, or let it sit, as it's too hot, because it'll begin to smoke and burn the pan, and then you're going to begin to taste that on the meat. So while this is heating up, we need to go ahead and address the seasonings for our steak, and make sure you don't put the oil on until the last minute, as the oil also can burn. So for my steak, I like to do it fairly simple. Salt, fresh ground pepper, and then I just have 2 steak seasonings that I like to put on there. This one is McCormick, and this one is just a Weber grill seasoning. When flipping the steak over to season the other side, and when turning it while it's on the stove and removing it, best thing to use is going to be tongs. If you use a fork or any other puncturing item, you're going to cause the holes in there that allow the moisture to actually leave the meat. Alright, so the steak's seasoned. Oven is not quite hot yet. So one of the other important things to know about the cut of meat that you need to do is allow it to come to room temperature prior to beginning cooking it. It takes about a half an hour sitting out on a counter, but what this does is it allows the steak to cook more evenly, and you don't get the outside more done than the inside because the inside was still, cold from a refrigerator. So this steak has had time to come to room temperature, and now we're just going to give it a few more seconds for the stove to heat up. The stove and the cast iron skillet are now up to temperature. So now I'll begin to add the olive oil. I choose to use the extra light, extra virgin olive oil, the light just to kind of save some calories for myself, but that can all be done on personal preference. After the olive oil is placed in the skillet, take and allow the olive oil to be moved around so you get a pretty even coating over the whole skillet. So again, without letting the olive oil sit for too long, you're then going to want to place the steak onto the skillet. You should hear a very nice sizzle. Hopefully you can hear that from there, because that is the sound of what's going to taste amazing. I'll now take the plate that I used to begin to season the meat and move it to the side as it's raw meat on there, so I'm going to use a fresh plate when I go to eat. I'd like to do the steak cooking on each side for approximately 45 seconds. I set the timer to 2 minutes to allow myself to watch it, only because I don't have one that does strictly seconds, so I'll adjust and rotate accordingly. At about 45 seconds, I like to spin the meat 90 degrees to allow you to get the cross marks as if you were cooking it on a grill. If you're done right, it's very hard for anyone to be able to tell that it wasn't done on a grill compared to on a stove. So I did the first rotation, and now I'm going to wait the extra 45 seconds for it to cook the rest on this side, and I'll rotate it, I'll flip it over to cook the other side. All this is going to do is give me that sear on the top and the bottom evenly. All of the inside is actually going to be cooked inside of the oven. I like to use convection. It gives it a little bit more even of a cook and a little bit faster, but it also allows the meat to cook and be seared with the juices in. Some people use one of the cooking bags from Reynolds or some of the other, methods to allow the juices to stay into the steak. For myself, I just like to get a good sear on the outside and it traps all the moisture inside. So we're coming up to our 45 seconds on the second side. So I'll get ready to flip it over. And we have some perfect grill marks on the steak that I'll go ahead and show you once we take it off for the last time so I don't interrupt this cooking process. So I accidentally set the timer to 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes, so I'm actually going to have to, as soon as it stops, reset it for an extra minute. That'll give me the full 3 minutes of 45 seconds rotated, and then flipped over and the same process repeated. So upon completion of the next rotation, which is coming up right now, I will then place it into the oven. I use like I said, a beef tenderloin. They're cut rather thick compared to, a sirloin or a ribeye. So if you use this method on another steak, you will have to adjust your time accordingly. But for myself, I like my steak a nice medium rare. So when I remove from the top of the oven and place it inside the oven, I'll cook it for approximately 6 minutes before I pull it out. During that 6 minutes, again, I'll cut away and come back. That way you guys can see the full process. Time is coming up on the timer. I'll get ready to shut it off so the beeping isn't annoying both to yourself and to me. All right, so it's now had a chance to cook for 45 seconds, rotated on both the top and the bottom. And I'll place it into the oven. Another reason why I like to use the cast iron skillet is I can use the same skillet both inside and on top of the oven, allowing that heat to stay there and allowing it to cook evenly. So I'll then set my timer for 6 minutes, and I shall return when that's done.